My freaking settings. Hello? Oh, hey, hi. I'm fine, who are you?
We need one more mic, please. The handheld. We only have the two. Oh, this one is working.
Mirroring.
Hello?
Hello?
Hello? Hello. There we go. Good, thanks.
Yeah, it's on the wrong window, and I can see you. Sure. That's completely backwards. You don't want to see that. Swap. Wouldn't it be great if PowerPoint had options, swap displays? Wouldn't that be terrific? Hi, everybody. Hi there. We're actually ready now. Yay! Go team. I'd like to welcome you to the NOTACON. Even if you've already been here for a day and a half, it is the con that hugs you. You'll notice that we have a math problem going on here. There's supposed to be 4 people on the panel. It looks to me like there's only 3. This is not Jillian's first con experience. That would be ShmooCon. This is Jillian's first con party experience. I'm sure it'll all work out for the best. I'm going to actually sit down because it's a good idea for all of us if I sit down. I'm going to stand up because it's a good idea for all of us that I stand up. Hacking the future, weaponizing the next generation. So this talk has come out of my experience in going to a bunch of hacker cons at which I notice that I keep seeing all of the same faces with more and more wrinkles. We're all getting older, and darn it, some of us have procreated. Whoops. Most importantly, we all have jobs and such. This is not our job. Anything we say can be attributed only to us. The voices in your head, not my problem. No spiders or clowns are involved in the production of this presentation. Let's introduce the panel, shall we? I'd do the game show voice, but I can't. This is Leigh Honeywell. She's a Jane of many trades, a security consultant. She's doing a degree at the University of Toronto, something I hope to start one day. Co-founder and director of HackLab.to. She's on the board for Sector, Google Summer of Code Mentor, which is amazing because I couldn't do that job for anything. She rides bikes. Hey, anybody else want to ride bikes? Let's go ride bikes. She uses information on slices of cellulose. She travels a lot. Generally, if you're trying to talk to Leigh, just don't ask where she is because you'll be upset that you're not also enjoying the life she has. And for the purposes of this talk, most important, she is the honorary aunt to many. Seated beside Leigh is Tiffany. Tiffany and I have worked together before. Feel free to download our talk and learn. She's a lawyer, she's a hacker, she's a professor. She's smarter than most people that you know. She talks all over the place. She likes cars, and she hacks them. She's building school integrated hacker spaces, which is way cooler than the non-school integrated hacker spaces. And she's of the interesting variety called mom. Jillian's not here. If she was, you'd know that she's a college student and she's really fundamentally awesome. It was important to have her here. I'm going to do a sock puppet version of her. She's the victim of all of this. She's what happens when you have hackerish parents. Everybody knows who I am. Dad. So here's what we want to talk about. We spent a lot of time backing and forthing in Twitters and DMs and text messages and IMs and everything, trying to figure out sort of what are the key threads in the whole next generation stuff. What are those things that are critical to comprehend in detail? And what we came up with is what to expect when you're expecting the Hacker Edition. Schools and learning, a point of contention. Gender issues, something that hackers in general, look around, it's testosterone in here, are really, really bad at, and we need to get very much better at because we're kissing some of the best hackers in the world on the forehead and telling them to go back and play with Barbie. And we need to talk about what happens when your hacker children grow up. So, we're going to ramble a lot through this point. These are the points we're going to talk about. First off, having a kid. Sometimes it just happens. Sometimes it's a decision that you agonize over forever and ever and ever. And, yeah.
For your life.
However, this is not the kind of O'Day that you can sell on the open market. I really do want to sit down. If this squeals, I'm sorry.
Turn it down.
I can't turn anything. I have no control, which is also a big part of having a kid. So, telling stories, because that's the biggest part of the panel thing. Having a kid was a really hard decision. I didn't think that I would be any good as a parent whatsoever. Turns out I was wrong, I think. Jury's still out. Talk to me again in a decade when she turns 18. But it's definitely a decision that you have to make, and it's a decision that has two sides. There's the society's promulgation of the Barbie and Ken stereotype decision, which is go forth and procreate wildly, madly, enjoy it. There's a mess to clean up. It'll happen in about 9 months. But have fun. There's another side to that argument. Yeah, I'm looking at you with those eyes. Yeah.
So I'm not really sure exactly how to take this, but basically choosing to not have kids it's something that I've sort of considered long and hard for probably the past 10 years. I basically told my mom when I was in my late teens that she wasn't allowed to bug me until I was 28 because that's when she had me. So she just couldn't talk to me about it until then. And I'm not quite there yet, but at this point I've basically decided not to have kids. And it's been sort of interesting seeing who decides that they want to like give me a hard time about this or not. And I think that it's really important to think about in terms of choosing whether or not to have kids, why you're doing it, what you want your legacy in your life to be, and whether having kids is the right way to go about doing that. And for a lot of people it is, and for some people it isn't. And fundamentally, I think you shouldn't give people a hard time for not wanting to have kids. So.
And for me, I have two kids. One is 2 and the other one's 4. And kind of like the split in the road, sometimes when you get married, no one ever plans for doing it all alone. But I'm a single mom raising 2 hackerish kids. And it's one of the other reasons that I wanted to be on this panel is to talk about education and how sometimes you have to fill multiple roles at the same time. And it's challenging when you have very bright kids to be all of that.
And wrapping up. Oh, sorry.
Before we switch back, I think it's really important for us. You know, most of us here probably remember the experience of growing up as a smart kid and how challenging that was as a kid. It's challenging too as a parent. So that's I think a lot of what we're going to talk about here.
Mm-hmm. I have my own because I'm special. My mom told me so. The most important thing to remember is the act of having children is a theoretically premeditated, but definitely an act of passing information from one generation to another. It's information encoded in the form of genes, but that's not the only way to pass information from one generation to another. There are other kinds of information that can be offered that may in fact be more valuable. You may decide that for reasons of just plain old medical stuff, you're not going to have kids because you know that you could pass on to them something that would not be good. You could decide that you're not going to have kids because you know that you'd suck at it. And you can make that decision for yourself.
Though it's worth noting that I think a lot of folks who think they would suck at being parents are the ones who would be best at it.
That is a great point.
Absolutely. somebody in the audience just pointed out that the reverse also holds true, and yeah, that's definitely the case.
There's even a name for that. It's called imposter syndrome. If you're really, really, really awesome at something, you probably think you suck at it. And if you think you know something so cold you're willing to call yourself an expert, you suck at it.
Yeah, there's sort of, on one side you've got imposter syndrome, and on the other side you've got the Dunning-Kruger effect, which if folks aren't familiar with the Dunning-Kruger effect, it's something you have definitely seen in your day-to-day life, but it's basically the scientific term for people being unable to assess their own incompetence. And I highly recommend you look up the paper that gave it that name. Dunning-Kruger. Yeah, because it's quite insightful.
There's lots of points to it. There's lots of challenges to it. I would suggest, knowing what I know now, that if you're planning on having a kid, you put yourself through the same arduous process that adoptive parents are put through. Prove that you can do it before you do it.
And the flip side to that, so advice I was given recently, which I actually think is really interesting, is if you're female and you're pretty sure that you don't want to have kids, but you aren't entirely sure, consider banking your eggs. It sounds totally whack, but especially if you're like in your early 20s and think you might not have kids until your late 30s, totally worthwhile. It's only a couple $100 a year.
Who knew that they came with best before dates? When I sent this slide deck around to my co-panelists, there was some question as to whether or not we were suggesting that you 3D print your own IUDs. Remember, IUDs are love springs internal. There's no spring, it's not an IUD. Changes in your life when you have kids, you cannot predict. You can read all the books you want, you can talk about it as much as you want, you can think you're an expert, that you think you've got it all covered. You will have to make more changes than just child-proofing your home. This is the thing you put in an electrical outlet so your child doesn't put fork in the electrical outlet. You're gonna have kids that are smart enough to know how to pull that out when they're 1. You're gonna have a lot of child-proofing related problems that are not common to the general populace.
Like the 9-year-old that snarfed the principal's password.
I was reading that on the internet.
9 years old.
I think his name is Ferris.
It was written down on, it might not have been the principal, it might have been the teacher, but it was written down on the school person's desk.
Hey,
so.
Brandon, Post-its. So be prepared for a level of change that is actually completely off the charts. I mean, when you think about changing your entire state of life from being the kind of person who lives in the suburbs to the kind of person who is a nomad or who lives in a city, it's more than that by a lot. And a big part of that is having to segregate parts of your life from each other and do a better job than you think needs to be done, because it ends up being important. If you're responsible for electrocuting your own kid, you sort of failed parenting, in my opinion. Plain advice, kids are really expensive. I mean, like, really expensive. When they say that a diaper holds from 12 to 15 pounds, they don't mean waist, they mean size of child. There are opportunities for economy, there are not always opportunities for economy. While I don't say that you've got to have, a crap ton of savings and a great job, and you don't want to have everything, you can have less than everything if you're willing to make appropriate compromises. My kids wear secondhand clothes. Why? Because rich, stupid people put things in the secondhand bin that still have the tags on them. And I can get really awesome clothes for my kids for not very much money. Or I can get them really crappy clothes for about the same money. And you know what? I know plenty of people that would never put their kids in secondhand clothes. My child doesn't wear someone else's clothes. It happens.
And yet, so frequently, these are the same people who will do hand-me-downs from one generation to of the next of their own kids. Yet, you know, thrift store, oh my goodness.
I should point out that there are some items of clothing that you don't buy at the thrift store. I've heard it's wrong. It's also really important to remember that if you can't be in it together, you at least have to have roughly the same goals, or you have to have a tacit agreement that one of you is in charge and the other one isn't. Because you're going to be making so many big financial decisions so often that you've got to have your ducks in a row on this stuff, or there will be much fighting. One of my favorite slides. Aren't they cute? I'm going to say a little bit to kick it off, and then I'm definitely passing on. When you're having a kid, you have the potential to build a hacker if you do it right. You have to face the fact that you might have a kid that isn't a hacker, but you can still build the ethic and the ethos in, and you shouldn't wait to start. This is my daughter, Amelia. In this picture, she's not quite 8 years old. This is my friend Leigh. And they're making a MakerBot.
I think the important thing from this experience was it sort of clued me into just how much of a positive influence you can be on other people's kids, even if you don't want to have kids of your own. That just, you know, spending the time to teach somebody how to program an Arduino or how to put together a MakerBot or whatever it is that you're, even just how to, like, teaching someone how to solder can be like profoundly influential when you're 10 or 12 years old. I mean, I think a lot of us probably had experiences of that kind of mentoring at a young age, and some of us didn't actually have experiences like that at a young age of being mentored in sort of science and technology. I was raised by a pack of lawyers, so didn't have that many sort of mentors at a young age who were into science and math and stuff. You know, reach out to your friends that have kids and say, you know, hey, do you want me to teach Junior how to solder?
And from my background, I was homeschooled through most of my education, and I know that's it's expensive. It takes usually one parent being home most of the time, or having the money, as I've seen the DC area, to hire a tutor to stay home with the kids. And I'm going to be talking about some of the hackerspace school that we have set up in Northern Virginia, and how it's kind of I know it's an oxymoron, but a homeschool school that I was able to do internships at an early age because I wasn't sitting in a classroom for 8 hours a day, 5 days a week. I was working at the National Institutes of Health, developing artificial blood when I was 13, working for the Navy research labs, this type of thing. It doesn't take a genius child to do these. It takes mentors, parents willing to kind of look outside the box of what public education and private education offers and say, well, maybe I can do something better, differently. If what is out there doesn't exist, I'll make it right. So I definitely had a lot of great mentors who helped me get to do the stuff that I do today. And my parents being one of them. My dad was an original hacker from the 70s. He was one of the contributors and one of the writers of the movie Sneakers, which is a fantastic hacker movie, but he's old school. He breaks into places so people couldn't break into places, and he took me and my brother on some projects. It was fantastic. When he'd do a break-in, we didn't go to the really interesting ones, but he'd have all the equipment in his office, and we'd be able to say, he'd say, this is how you get through a metal detector. Let me show you how many nickels in your pocket it takes for the sensitivity. But that type of curiosity, that's the type of thing that sometimes it's hard to get, even in the best private schools. So later on the slides, I'll talk about how maybe without being able to afford an expensive private school education, or if you find your public schools just aren't meeting your kids' needs, how you can do it a little bit differently with the help of hacker spaces.
Failure. North America sucks at failure, except for all the parts that are failing. There's a lot of value in it. If you have a kid who's never had a broken bone, you have a kid that you've probably been helicopter parenting a little too hard. There needs to be the opportunity for, wow, that's what happens when you screw up. Some consequential kind of stuff. There's a theory that says the sooner you learn how to fail with eloquence and elegance, the the better you're able to take big fail later on. And we have entire generations now that are discovering failure only when they're in their 20s. So it's kind of hard. You can sort of see Leigh's hand there. So she's in the shot. Because I'm propping my own kids. That's my son, Andrew. In this picture, he's just shy of 6. He's a bit of a clone, which presents problems of its own. He's wearing a modified Arduino that's set up to be a someone sneaking up on me detector. There's an infrared sensor on his shoulder. So he wanted to have eyes in the back of his head. We gave him the next best thing. And I hadn't taught him how to teach chess, or I hadn't taught him how to play chess, that's it, because I thought he was too young. Fail. I was so wrong. And he learned how to play chess, and now he plays chess regularly against a computer. He is capable of beating me. I'm just not going to let him know that quite yet, because, like I said, he's a clone, and his ego would no longer fit in this room. Critical thinking is not a feature of humanity that is well respected right now. But I think you owe it to your kid to teach it. And if you can't, you need to find someone who can. And it's okay to absolve yourself of the guilt related to that. To be able to say, I can't, or I fail, or I need help is perfectly okay, and lots of parents don't ever admit that. They would rather have the kid that doesn't work well than admit they don't work well. And I think there's something fundamentally wrong about that. Fair warning, your kids turn into you. They're carrying half of your genetic information and half of the genetic information you had the kid with. If they're not carrying your genetic information because they're adopted, they still turn into you. You need to be prepared for this. Your password is not strong enough, they can shoulder surf. Locks? That'll work. Think about you at their age, that's what they are experiencing. And when I was about 8, I was less than a year away from having a computer in the house, and I was thinking about ways that I could take over the world. Sometimes they do stuff that completely amazes you because they have capabilities and capacities that you've given them. Bridge building contest. It was engineering month last month. How many people knew that? Okay, like 6, and the one person in the audience I know is an engineer didn't put up her hand. Oh, okay. Wasn't paying attention, right. So this is a bridge building contest at the Science and Technology Museum in Waterloo, near the University of Waterloo, and she's never built a bridge before, not one that carries 31 pounds, made out of connects, which are usually too floppy to use for anything else. And she didn't know she could do it. Her first 2 or 3 bridges didn't work out. And because she knows that it's okay to screw up, and it's okay to fail, and it's okay to not win, and it is okay to keep trying, she kept trying. And it seems to me she's figured out triangulation pretty well there. So that same persistence and perseverance that shows up, in this case I'm pointing out that she's entirely too much like my wife, persistent and strong-willed.
Smart.
Wicked smart. You're gonna get pwned by your kid. Just fair warning. It could be little, it could be big. My son shoulder surfed my password because my computer is faster than his. Already. Yeah, I'm looking forward to the next one. Be prepared for it. Mostly be prepared to be graceful about it. and be prepared to offer an appropriate mixture of pride and concern. You want to make sure they know that you're happy they are amazing, and at the same time, you don't want to let them know that it's a good thing to go around pwning people, because that just turns you into a jerk. Schools and learning. This is going to be a lot of not me talking, I promise. So, educators.
All right, so I teach at the University of Southern Maine in the computer science department, and I teach in a public school system in a state where actually the public school, the college, is on the verge of bankruptcy. So we've had to be very creative in getting students access to tools and equipment that we can't quite get by appealing to the University of Maine. I mean, I'm in the CS department, and I have 46 in my office. And so I'm like, okay, well, let's build a better one. So the students are working on that, and I bring in guest presenters such as Travis Goodspeed has come up, Dan Kaminsky's on his way up. So I'm bringing very interesting presenters to the students in Maine who otherwise wouldn't have the opportunities to do these things. Last year at DEF CON, I presented with Dan Kaminsky and one of my students. His name was Elliot Bradbury, and we brought 12 students out, and mostly it was money the students had put up themselves because the university couldn't afford to fly them, but we had more students at DEF CON than like MIT, Caltech, like other groups that we've seen that have a much bigger and well-funded computer science department. We brought them out to this information security conference because we think, and I think and a few other faculty members do too, that thinking like a hacker is actually very good for getting jobs, for working on projects, learning how to take things apart, how they work. That's just as important as learning the theory behind like big O notation. So we're trying to bring more laboratory equipment into the university, but we can't quite afford stuff like a 3D printer. So this is what we're doing in Northern Virginia, kind of way down the Atlantic where I have my other job when I'm not teaching once a week at University of Maine. I'm in Washington, D.C. area in Northern Virginia. I was homeschooled, and my mom took a lot of the lessons, literally like the lesson plans and the pros and cons. My brother and I were kind of like the trial for it. And now all the bad stuff has been weeded out. And my mother has run a private school for homeschool students, and I'll tell you how that works, for 15 years now. We have seen a progression of the way that kids are learning that's a little bit differently than 10 years ago or 15 years ago when my mom started her school. Kids now, just because of the easy access to information, they want the answers and they want to understand it and see it right now. You know, the effects of Google are fantastic. We can get all this information. But what's tough is teaching kids to slow down and say, okay, you still are going to have to read the Scarlet Letter, okay? It's what the colleges are looking for. I don't care if you're going to go into engineering, you're going to be reading that, and we're going to be having you read Plato and Aristotle, and these are on the book list if you want to go to the really good schools. So getting them to come off the computer, a lot of these students we have are fantastic with computers, and we see more coming in all the time that want to work in computer engineering or software design, and it's great. But we have seen a change in the way students learn. We have also seen a really rapid increase in kids who have been expelled or kicked out or quit the public and private school systems. The public and private schools, even the high-tech schools, are not quite meeting the needs of the students that they have right now. And this is the philosophy we have. We have a group of psychologists working with us. And we take some kids who have either through depression or problems, they just aren't making it either in the high-tech magnet schools or in the regular public schools, and some very expensive, like $30,000 a year private schools in DC. Where is it failing these kids? Why are we getting these kids who once had A's and B's and grade school, when they get to high school, especially a lot of the girls we see coming out of the private schools, they're failing everything. And what we believe is that people are learning a little bit of a different way than the public schools and the private school curriculums maybe just aren't keeping pace with our kids. I've seen the rapid increases of kids coming in on ADD, HD medications, being diagnosed with autism and Asperger's. And everyone's wondering, why are there so many kids? Is it the food we're eating? And it's hard to tell. Maybe there's an aspect of that. But what we consider at the school is maybe these kids are learning differently than the 1960s, post-Sputnik curriculum that a lot of us had to sit through 8 hours in a classroom with these old textbooks. Maybe that's not meeting the needs of the way kids are learning now, and the psychologists we work with go further, the way the kids' brains are functioning now. If you get on a computer when you're 3 years old, it's going to be differently wired than someone 20, who's in their 30s, 40s, or 50s who learned to use computers a little bit later in their life. The connections between the right and the left, the lobes are actually, the kids who are on computers have a little bit more of those connections. So maybe we need to change education to meet the needs of the kids now. That's what we're doing with the private school. We have a private school. It's actually a tutoring firm, and this is how we get around the legalities. And I'm also an attorney, so this is part of my job. The legalities of we don't want kids sitting in a classroom 8 hours a day, 5 days a week. We'd like them in the classroom for about maybe 4 hours. I mean, really, if you think about how long someone can concentrate, 8 hours is a long time, even for high school kids. So let's get them in there in the late morning. I mean, high school kids don't like getting up at 6 in the morning either. I think that's a big fallacy with a lot of the public schools getting kids up at 5, high school kids. So we get them up in sometimes the late morning. We don't have any licensed teachers teaching at our tutoring firm. A tutoring firm is meaning that we're not an academy. We have aspects of our curriculum, but we use the American school. The American school has been in business giving kids diplomas since like I think early 1900s. It used to be for kids who traveled a lot or parents were diplomats and you couldn't be in a classroom. Well, we're taking their curriculum, we're teaching it, but we're teaching it a lot more exciting than if you just sat around and did an online or a curriculum like that on your own. All of our teachers, as we call them tutors, just like they do at Oxford University, we discuss things. We use the Socratic method when we're learning about math and science and literature. We let students figure out, what do you take from this information? Not just spit back the facts and write the answer that the SAT board is going to want to read when you read about your essay on the Scarlet Letter. So we teach kids critical thinking. But one of the other things that we do is we're bringing the kids into a hacker space that's physically and contractually part of the program. So we bought about a 10,000 square foot building in Herndon, Virginia. Half of it is classroom space, and our teachers all have master's, PhDs, or are really passionate about the work they do. Passion, it goes a long way in teaching kids to be motivated. When we get some teachers coming right out of the public school system because they're laying off so many teachers now, they're kind of tired of doing what they've been doing. So when we bring in people like from Hack DC and other hacker spaces who are really excited, they get the kids excited. And guess what? The kids actually do like some of the subjects then. If you show them, okay, this is how we're learning some basic programming language. What can you do with it? So what we're doing is we're combining learning what we need to know and what the students need to know to be able to take the SATs and go to college if they wish, and combining that with projects we have going on with the hackerspace. We are creating some of their own projects to go with the curriculum like a robot we're building, but we're also allowing all the members of the hackerspace, we're actually going to give them a reduced membership per month if they share their projects with our high school students. And we have a lot of equipment in there. We just purchased a 3D printer, we're getting a laser cutter, so we can actually build stuff. So when the kids have great ideas, we'll go to the hackerspace and build it. So the hackerspace is about 5,500 square feet. And that's one of the ways that we're trying to change the education, that we believe that it's not these kids that are really failing our system, but it's our system that's failing these new kids. And when I say new, really, these kids have brains that are operating a little bit differently than those of us who are in their 30s and 40s. These kids are different, and different in a good way, and in a way that not all medications, ADD meds to calm people down will really change things. We get kids in there who are on all these ADD meds, and we don't take them off. The doctors make that decision. But it's the type of thing where we get kids in there, and even on the drugs, they're not able to sit down and do the SAT prep courses and stuff. But what it really takes is teaching them to different ways of learning. We have organizational classes, we have study skills classes. So we're trying to, even on an individual basis, meet these students' needs. What is the public school or private school not able to do? So that's how we're combining it with the hackerspace. And that's how there's so many hackerspaces here in the US and in Canada right now. If you have kids that are kind of a little bit advanced or need some extra assistance in different subjects, and a hackerspace has projects in that, go and get that. They have fantastic classes I've seen offered at a local one at Hack DC, that they do stuff for kids every month. So I would suggest, if the school's not meeting your kids' needs, look into your community, the hacker community, to see what they are doing.
Yeah, I went there. There is no reason why you shouldn't have a 10-year-old kid that knows Unix. Just saying. If they can click a start button, they can click well, they're not using Brown user interface anymore, but they can click other user interface elements. And sometimes pulling back the curtain a little bit and showing the magic that's underneath can cause interesting things to happen.
I think it's also worth reading some of the literature around like education and gifted kids if you're wanting to spawn, because there's particularly recently there's a bunch of interesting research around motivation and how basically like how you talk to your kids and how that affects their motivation and the sort of internal versus external locus of control, whether or not they feel that their world is influenced by, that the course of their life is going to be influenced by factors around them, or that they have sort of control over their lives. There's a really amazing article in the New York Magazine a few years ago that's been turned into a book called Nurture Shock by Poe Bronson, and I'm blanking on the name of his co-author, but the article was called How Not to Talk to Your Kids, and the book is called Nurture Shock. The central principle of what they're talking about there is that when you praise kids for being smart, rather than praising kids for putting effort into something, effort becomes something that's actually stigmatized. If you have to work hard at something, it means you're not smart enough. And I don't know how many people identify with that, but when I read this, I like burst into tears, because this was something that had so profoundly affected how my education had gone. And I think that one of the best things that people can possibly do for their kids is to praise them for effort, not for any sort of intrinsic qualities, because there's all this interesting research showing that we're so malleable by our environment, and so much of like the course of our lives is affected by the effort that we put into things, not just sort of a raw IQ, for as much as IQ is worth anything as a metric. Exactly, the line was genius is 90% perspiration and 10% inspiration. I think it's more like 99 and 1.
And we get a lot of students and parents who come to our school saying, well, your school must just be for the gifted kids, because we have kids that we graduate from, like we get kids in the 9th grade and they're done with high school by the end of the 10th grade, and they're often, we can teach college courses accredited as well. These are not all kids with very high IQs. In fact, we don't care what the IQ score is. If they come in and they're just not motivated and we can't get them to really get their work done, we take the time, we let them take time, and we get them some counseling if they need it to work through whatever the issues they're having. But if we motivate the kids and get them excited about projects, we found that really, there is no difference between IQ and kids that, we're getting some kids that we know have come in with some problems, academic problems in school, possibly because of lower IQ, and it doesn't matter. These kids are getting into the same colleges as the ones that come in with the very high IQs. It really has a lot to do, not all of them, but it is definitely something that we don't look to IQ at all. If you can provide projects to get kids interested in things, and this is where I think hackerspaces can fantastically fill this gap right now. That really is something that shouldn't divide students, is give them all the opportunity.
Next up, something that society in general sucks at, and something that most, and only because it is predominantly male, most hackers are even worse at. It's astonishing. I also know very little about it. So again, I'm going to shut up. STEM is science, technology, engineering, and math, and we have 10 minutes.
Okay, so really short version. If you're having kids who are girls, read the book Unlocking the Clubhouse, Gender and Computing if you want to have any hope of encouraging them to do computer-related stuff. And the flip side of that is the way that as a society we construct gender roles to say, girls cook and boys play with cars, and it's a friend of mine had a blog post recently about the baby clothes that she's dressed her kid up, who is female, but she's observed which particular baby clothes cause which people to assume her kid is male or female, and if there is any pink visible on her kid, obviously it's female. If there is no pink, even if there's like yellow or other pastels, it's probably a boy. Like, people will guess that it's a boy. If there are any dinosaurs, cars, planes, all of these things have caused people to assume that her kid is a boy, even without any other cues. So in terms of what the impact of that is, these restrictive gender roles hurt men as well as women. It sucks that, you know, there aren't more male nurses, for example, because people think it's people have an issue with seeing themselves in roles where there aren't role models available, and I think that that really sucks for all of the professions where there is a majority men or a majority women. Not because we should expect there to be 50-50. I think that's a fallacy. Like, it's not a numbers game. It's a people being fulfilled by their lives game. And fundamentally, like, that's what it's all about. The comment that Jamie made earlier that you know, we're telling the next great hacker to go and play with Barbie. We're missing out as a profession. We're missing out as a community, as is nursing, or you know, whatever other elementary school teachers. Like, how many other professions are hurting because of these, like, fairly explicitly enforced in our society gender roles. It's actually one of the things that they talk a lot about in Unlocking the Clubhouse is the fairly common experience that women, girls in high school who go to their guidance counselor and say, I want to go into computer science, have of being told, well, why don't you think about biology? It'll you know, I think you'd be better at biology. It's actually, that kind of thing actually really still happens. So it's worth thinking about. I really can't recommend the book Unlocking the Clubhouse enough. It's a fantastic study, came out of Carnegie Mellon University, where in the 5 years that they ran that study, they increased enrollment by recruiting differently, not by doing any sort of affirmative action. They just recruited women a lot harder. They increased their enrollment from 7% to 43% women, and they also dropped their dropout rate from 80% of women students at the start of the study were dropping out before the end of the program, and at the end of the study, only 20% of female CS students were not completing the program, which was the same rate as male students. So I can't recommend that book enough.
I will put together a blog post that has all of the referential material that we've used and talk about it on the Twitter.
And in the computer science department at the University of Maine, I've been teaching there for about 5 years, and I teach a particular class. It's like computer law and ethics that for our accreditation for our school for computer science, we have to teach this class. And I've turned this class into a lot about like hacking. It's very exciting. But so I see all the students coming out of the program because everyone has to take this on the senior level. And in the 5 years I've been teaching, I've only had 3 female graduates, 3 females graduating from the computer science program. That's really the summary of it. And it really shouldn't, I don't see any reason why it should be that way. However, when I was taking some master's classes in a university, and it will remain unnamed right now, but we had some very older faculty members, shall I say, who were under a very different stereotype about women in engineering and science. And I actually had one discrete math professor who, throughout the whole semester, I was maybe 12, 15 students in the class. This was not like a 300-person class in a lecture hall. I was the only female student in the class. He could not come to remember my name. He remembered everyone else's, but he consistently referred to me as Barbie. He just could not come to bring himself to learn my name. And I'd have the same homework assignments. Wasn't always graded the same as some of my classmates. And I mean, I'm in my mid-30s. I thought, come on, I mean, this is stuff like from the women in the 80s faced. And this was, you know, in 2000, and it is still around. And if you see this going on at your university, I mean, the tough thing was what I see is I do see some students, female students in CS that have faced this. And often, I was talking to Jillian about this too, often women just quit. I did, in fact. I quit that class. I got an F in it. I decided I just couldn't go anymore. I was done. And I took it online and finished that up, you know, the great equalizer of online. My name, Tiffany, kind of gives a lot away, but it was nice to kind of stay anonymous otherwise. It helped for that class, but it's surprising. And Jillian, we were talking about this panel earlier, and Jillian was mentioning that she had a instructor in, I think it was computer science, that said she just couldn't understand circuits. He just made that statement, right? I mean, you would know more about that.
I was about to interrupt you and say, your experience was 10 years ago, her experience was last year or the year before, and she was referred to as girl throughout the course. And that kind of thing is it's not just a gender justice kind of issue.
It's a don't be a douchebag issue.
Pretty much.
I must say, I'm a big fan of the term douchebag as a feminist insult because douches are bad. Anyway, there's a lot of there are a lot of stereotypes. Who's seen that XKCD with the how it works? You suck at math, girls suck at math. That's really how it works. We have these narratives in our society of who's good at what, and so many of them are just wrong. There's a really interesting study that came out of the University of Toronto that showed that, there's this whole sort of, men are obviously better at spatial reasoning. That's why they're better at math, right? It turns out if you put women in front of first-person shooter video games, the test scores equalize. Isn't that amazing? I'm not even willing to go and say anybody's better at that. I think that there are so many social factors, so many life experience factors that go into that kind of experience that when it comes down to it, when you look at the bell curves, the overlap of those bell curves, the area there is so much greater than even like the differences in the distribution. Most of us are going to be in that overlap. That's what's important.
I'd like to point out that's math at which I suck. But Leigh has put more effort into this stuff than anyone else if you get a chance to corner her, because she could talk for multiple hours about this.
I have half a degree in this. I'm doing a double major in computer science and equity studies, where equity studies is like women's studies and disability studies and ISM studies, I like to call it. Yeah.
However, we only have 3 more minutes, so. Last topic. This stuff is really important. Right now, if you've got little kids, you are probably, but not determinately, smarter than they are. That will change. You can think it's sort of a fundamental philosophy of parenting. You should want your kids to be better than you in any possible way. And you should be willing to subsume your conference room-sized ego in order to make sure that that happens. And part of that is realizing that by the time your kids are in their early teens, you're going to be working your butt off to keep up. And it is on you to make sure that they can still have discussions with you. Particularly
if they end up interested in something that you're not that into. I was raised by a pack of lawyers, and while it's been relatively easy for me to keep up with with sort of the things that they talk about because I was raised on it, I've had conversations with my parents about tech stuff where they're just like, meow. And these are very, very, very smart people, but it's just not what they are experts in. And there's a fairly good chance that you will raise kids who want to be doctors, unless you're, I don't know how many doctors there are here, but doctors or, God forbid, lawyers, or other things that you are not experts in. Apologies to the lawyers on the panel.
and sort of remember that you're supposed to be your kid's fanboy. So as much as you're into something, you need to apply that same amount of effort to being into whatever the heck it is your kid is into, because that's the deal. Also, watch with it. It's the whole point of the movie. Home. About the week after I went away to school, my bedroom was converted into a sewing room.
It took about 3 years. No, it was more like 5 years. Mine is now my mom's office.
Yeah. The concept of home is something that's getting slipperier and slipperier. I've moved far more times since I left home than I ever thought I would in my life. And the concept of home and the place called home and the refuge is important as your kids are young adults. Don't take that away from them too soon. It is also reasonable and fair to say that if your kid is 41, you can kick them right out. I'm getting the keep my hands moving thing here. So the next point is, oops, happens.
This is why sex ed is really important, guys. No, seriously.
Your kid's going to have a catastrophe, You don't get to yell at them for the catastrophe in the moment of the catastrophe. You don't get to put the value of a car ahead of the value of your kid. You need to suck it up and be an adult, because guess what? You are.
Again with the sex ed. The whole abstinence only thing, just in case anyone wasn't familiar with this, it doesn't work. Scarletine.com, amazing website for this stuff. If you don't want to talk to your kids about it, just tell them to go read the entire website. There's a forum too.
Oh, you're cutting me off now. Okay, the last thing I'm going to say, this is how you contact us. I will post something on that website that has link back to everything that smarter people than me talked about. Thank you very much for coming. Have an awesome time at the rest of NOTACON, and make sure you come out for
Ask
block
us
party.
questions outside.
Yeah, that too.